It is 2 o'clock. So happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to today's Water Wednesday. If this is the first time you tune into Water Wednesday, you may wonder what is Water Wednesday. So for Water Wednesday is a Facebook live series provided by University of Florida IFAS extension agents and specialists every Wednesday afternoon, 2 o'clock Eastern Time. We gave a science-based talk about Florida precious resources, water. So what is UF IFAS extension? Because I mentioned that we're a group of agents and specialists with the University of Florida IFAS extension. So IFAS stands for Institute of Food and Agriculture Sciences. So for extension, I always say the best way to describe us is we are the extension of University of Florida. We provide university or we extend university science-based and research-based information to public. So we have different ways how we deliver these science-based information to general public. Usually we do like in-person workshops, seminars, and we also have field days, one-on-one consultations. So something special during this special time is we are offering a lot of virtual programs. And like today, it is a Facebook Live program. So you don't need to register. The only thing you need to do is just turn into this Facebook page, UF IFAS Extension, Central District Water Resources, every Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So for this Water Wednesday, we will talk about irrigation. So do you have an irrigation system? So is your irrigation system becoming more irritation than fun to for your yard or for all the gardening time you would like to spend? So if your irrigation system is becoming an irritation, then that's the right time you turn in, because it doesn't have to be, it can be very simple. So today I have guest speakers. One is Tina McIntyre. She's the horticulture agent, and she's the Florida-friendly landscaping agent, to be more specific, in Seminole County. And I also have Brooke Moffis. She is the residential horticulture agent in Lake County. So they will join me on today's Water Wednesday just to give you some simple steps to maintain an effective irrigation system. So now let's welcome our speakers.
Hello, everyone. I'm just pulling up our presentation, so bear with me for a second. My name is Brooke Moffis, and I am in Lake County, so right in the middle of the state. You'll see a couple links if you're interested in some of our programs specific to Seminole and Lake County, but a lot of our programs right now are virtual, as you all can imagine, and you're all Zooming in or Facebook Living in right now. So we have lots of virtual sessions that can actually be viewed anywhere that you have internet access. So click on our links to check us out. And like Elin said, we are through UF IFAS Extension. Again, Seminole County with Tina, Lake County with me, and we are both Florida-friendly landscaping and horticulture extension agents. So I always like to describe extension for a minute as a partnership between the university and the county, because that's truly what we are. Throughout our counties, we are seen as a public resource, much like libraries, parks, and trails. From the university standpoint, we're seen as a way to get research-based information out to the end user. So if you come to us, our charge is to provide you research-based information that improves your quality of life and, give you unbiased, again, research-based information. So I'll get right into it. Today, we're going to talk about Florida-friendly landscaping just briefly. We'll talk about non-point source pollution, why we should care, and how that impacts our irrigation. We're going to discuss the Florida irrigation laws very briefly. We'll get into irrigation and turf, and then we're going to get into components of an irrigation system. Now, next week, we are actually going to go over all of the problems that you can experience with the system and some of those solutions too. So make sure, I'm using this as a teaser, a shameless plug to get you, all logged in for next week as well. So the 9 Florida-friendly landscaping principles, I'll go over them very quickly. Right plant, right place. Number 2 is water efficiently, which we're going into great depth today. And then fertilizing appropriately, mulching, attracting wildlife, managing yard pests responsibly, recycling, and this is all ways that you can recycle in your own yard, using rain barrels or, creating a compost pile, reducing your stormwater runoff, and protecting the waterfront. So today we're talking really about three of those principles: water efficiently, reducing stormwater runoff, and protecting the waterfront. So let's talk about what a watershed is. We all live in a watershed, and it's really an area of land that drains into a stream, a river, a lake, or perhaps eventually the ocean. Now, watersheds can be very large or they can be very small, but your watersheds feed into each other. So if you look at the top of this picture here, you see a small stream. It looks like it's by a farm. And then over to the hill on the right, you see a little forested area. Well, those can actually each be in their separate watersheds. So you have the farm that feeds into this stream here, and you have the forest that feeds into this stream here and follows it down, eventually creating a river. So cumulatively, you can add these all together and they all feed in to the river's watershed down below. And, eventually that river could feed into an ocean, and then that has a massive watershed. So just an interesting fact that I got from Cornell University is that one of the largest watersheds is the Mississippi River. It takes up 2/3 of the United States. But if you think about it, each little mountain stream that makes up that, Mississippi watershed is its own watershed feeding into a much larger watershed. So this is important because what we do in our lawns and landscapes impacts our watersheds. And we'll talk about that. So some of the pollution problems and some of the issues we have are stormwater runoff. So you can see here on the left, the natural water cycle. We'll go over it really quick. You probably got this in grade school, but it's always good to have a nice reminder. My husband says he remembers when one of his science teachers would stand up on the desk and he'd say, condensation, precipitation, evaporation, and he would go through this whole thing. So condensation up in the cloud formation, then we have precipitation, then we actually get infiltration, which is really, really important. And that's where that precipitation is filtered by the soil. And then we get the evaporation coming off of lakes and other water bodies, or maybe just even a puddle in your driveway of all things. And then we get evapotranspiration. And this is important because it's a very important part of the natural water cycle to have this evapotranspiration. It makes up about 15% of the moisture that we have in the air. So that comes from again, any evaporation, but also from the leaves of your plants, trees, turf, shrubs, transpiring, releasing some of that moisture. So we don't have that kind of evapotranspiration or that much evapotranspiration in a lot of urban water cycles. So we do get the condensation. We get a lot less infiltration into the soil because we have all these impervious surfaces like sidewalks and driveways and things like that, or roofs even. And so, that contributes to runoff. You've got a lot of water falling onto hard impervious surfaces or developed hard compacted soils, and then it runs off and goes directly into some of our water bodies. And with that runoff, we can get pollutants and that type of thing. So we're not getting the infiltration in a typical urban water cycle. So let's talk about non-point source pollution. Non-point source pollution is really just pollution that you cannot point at. It's not the big bad factory that's dumping its waste straight into the river. We can point at that. We can say exactly where that pollution is occurring. Non-point source pollution is, guess what? The things that we do in our own yards, right? So it could be misapplying fertilizers, not doing at the right times of year, or possibly applying them just before a heavy rainfall. It could be bacteria pollution problems that we can get in our water bodies. And I know that's not a very pleasant picture to look at, but it happens. And so, that's what we can get from pet waste and that type of thing. And then we can get sediment as well. And sediment is often an issue that's occurring in areas where we have bare soil and it has not been planted by a ground cover or turf or some other type of landscape plant. Another area where sediment can be an issue is in construction sites as well, or close to construction sites. You can get a lot of the sediment that can go into our water bodies, and it can, really disturb our aquatic plant life and our aquatic, maybe some of our insects and even fish as well. And then we get things like, I didn't realize how harmful some detergents can actually be to our water system. So we can get things like some of our detergents getting in there, and they can cause issues for some fish and some other aquatic life forms. We can also get oils and pesticides. And I think we all can realize that oils and pesticides can be very harmful to our water bodies and to the environment for that matter as well. But think about those detergents too. All right, so some things that happen with non-point source pollution, and this is just one of the things that can happen, and that's water quality impairment. We'll get excess nutrients, so too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus, and they can come from inorganic synthetic fertilizers, but they can come from organic things like pet waste too. And they can even come from things like leaf clippings. So just keep that in mind. It's not always the fertilizer. Sometimes it's organic sources that can impair our water bodies. But fertilizer does have a part to play, right? And that's one that we can most easily control. But anyhow, when you get these excess nutrients, you get excessive algae growth, that can reduce water clarity and quality. And then what can happen with that, and this is when we usually notice it, is when we get those fish kills. And then loss of recreation. Who wants to, kayak, canoe, or paddle or whatever in a impaired water body? So, one where you have a lot of algae growth. And this is when it gets me, because I love Florida's water bodies. This is why I stay here. I enjoy going to the beaches. I love going canoeing and kayaking. And just curious, we'll continue with the presentation, but where are your favorite places to canoe and kayak? I'm actually asking this for a little bit of a selfish reason. So I'm looking for some new spots. I like going down the Dora Canal because it's close to me, but I also enjoy Alexander Springs and Juniper Springs because they're all in the area. So, but curious to places that you love the pristine water and you love to canoe and kayak. Let me know in the chat box. All right, so our landscapes do matter, and what we do in our landscapes matter. And I think this trio of pictures is very interesting. I like to ask the question, which landscape do you think contributes to non-point source pollution the least? And hopefully that makes sense. Which landscape contributes to non-point source pollution the least? This is actually one of those trick questions that I always hated in school because there is no best answer, or I guess there's a best answer, but there's not a right answer because it all depends on how people manage their landscapes. So, but what I would like to point out for some things for you to consider is if you have a landscape with sidewalks and you have a stormwater drain and you have this turf here, if you are not sweeping up that fertilizer and leaving it on the turf where it can be pulled by the plant roots and filtered through the soil, then you could be contributing to non-point source pollution, or you will be contributing to non-point source pollution. So anything that's spilled, if you're using a broadcast spreader and it goes onto the sidewalk or into the street, sweep it up, put it back onto the lawn, because there is no filtration system in a stormwater drain. And I think a lot of people do not realize that. Your stormwater drains go straight to your nearest water body. The landscape on the right, a little blurry there, but anyhow, you can see a little bit of turf and they have some ornamental grasses. Perhaps they're native, perhaps they're non-native. I can't really tell in this picture, but my point is with these ornamental grasses that they're growing, they may be able to get away with less fertilizer than turf, or they might be fertilizing instead of a broadcast spreader, they might be just sprinkling the fertilizer around the plants. So that could be a better option, but you still have to sweep up fertilizer from getting onto these sidewalks. So with these systems, it all depends on how you manage them to which one is going to, leach the least nutrients. Then this one I actually like to point out. This one in the bottom left corner is actually looks similar to my street. It doesn't have this fancy stormwater system there, but it still has a stormwater system. This is the swell in the yard. And this swell is really nice because it gives a chance for that water to percolate, infiltrate down into the soil. And so, but if this area gets flooded and we're putting excessive amounts of fertilizer down, it can still contribute to non-point source pollution because you get this full swell that goes straight into a water body. All right, so let's look at stormwater runoff. Stormwater runoff, basically it's when we have a rainfall event or maybe even an irrigation event, and it moves pollutants and it moves that water off site. So what you want to do is try to keep your water on site as much as possible. And I love what this homeowner did. You can actually see they have a stormwater system, one of the typical ones in maybe our higher income type neighborhoods. But they are it's raining right now, so you're getting some stormwater runoff that's going down into the gutter and into that storm system. But they also have a swell here where they've included a rain garden. So this just provides another opportunity to slow that rainwater down and let it infiltrate into the soil. And then, of course, this is the Florida Classic, right? I hate to say that. It shouldn't be the Florida Classic, but that's when folks are irrigating and their irrigation is actually so excessive, or it's directed off the target plant that you're trying to grow, and it gets into our streets and goes straight into our stormwater drain. This is just wasting water and moving pollutants as well. So, we definitely don't want to water sidewalks, turf only, or landscape plants only. So why do we need to irrigate? Well, if you are in Central Florida right now, we have had very, very little rainfall, and we are in the beginning of June. But the end of, I'm sorry, we're at the beginning of July. So the end of June, we were very, very dry, at least in my area of Central Florida. And it's, even with drought tolerant plants, it can be hard to pull plants through when we get droughty because we have 100-degree temperatures right now. And again, when we get very little rain, it's stressful on lots of plant species. So we do need irrigation, but I want you to think about this. We really only need irrigation for most plant species when we're droughty. So design your yard to where you're not thinking of the irrigation. Okay, what plants fit the irrigation? Think about what plants fit the conditions of your yard and then design your irrigation system around it. And I actually learned that from Miss Tina, who's the co-host today. So I thought that was a pretty good concept. But irrigation, it provides that water that's essential for plant health. And another way to think of this too is that irrigation supplements rainfall. Rainfall is still our main water source for our plant needs, but we need irrigation to supplement the rainfall to help pull those plants through, again, when we get extreme droughty type conditions. So just consider that with your irrigation systems. It's not the other way around. People like to operate their irrigation system as that you have your irrigation system and your rainfall supplements that, but no, it really should be the other way. All right, so let's also talk about reducing our outdoor water use. So residential water use, you can see our outdoor water use is actually about 59%. This graph is actually from American Water Works Association, their research foundation. So anyhow, outdoor water use is 59% of residential water use. And then you can see the other uses. So this is the low-hanging fruit. So if we really want to try to reduce the amount of water we use, let's target outdoor and let's target our irrigation systems. So in one study, they actually said the single most significant step most households can take to help preserve Florida's water is by conserving their water outside. And although homeowners will typically irrigate a little bit less in the winter months when we don't have the seasonal droughty issues, or we don't have, it's a season where you don't need to irrigate as much and you can actually lead to fungal diseases, they can still tend to overwater. All right, so let's talk about landscape irrigation laws. And then Tina, we'll talk about turf after that. And then Tina's going to get into, more of the irrigation components. But there are actually some laws around our irrigation system. One is any person who purchases and installs an automatic landscape irrigation system, so that's pretty much all irrigation systems, right? Any automatic one, they must properly install, maintain, and operate the technology to inhibit or interrupt operation of the system when sufficient moisture is present. So that's why we have those little rain sensors and soil moisture sensors too now. So If someone is working on your irrigation system and they find that it is faulty, they must install a new component or repair whatever the problem is with that existing irrigation system. And they have to confirm that you have proper operating conditions. So that is Florida law. Another part of Florida law is that you have to have the rain sensor, you have to have a soil moisture sensor, you have to have some type of rain shutoff device. And all of us really should have a rain sensor at a bare minimum to help, shut off that irrigation system when we do have sufficient moisture. The way these little things work is they have some cork disc on the inside. When they get wet, they swell and it signals that sensor to shut off or intercept the irrigation for that next cycle. Or, and then the other way it works too is if it is dry and it shrinks, it sends a signal to that rain sensor that it needs to go off that next cycle too. So, but this can be a little variable. All right, so another point I want to make about this is place your rain sensor outside of the drip line of your home. You want that rain sensor to intercept water. I see people putting it underneath eaves, and that's just not going to work. It's not going to intercept that water. So how much should you irrigate? When you're irrigating your turf, you want to deliver a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch per application. And the days that you irrigate depend on the water management district that you live in. So during the cooler months when grass is not actively growing, water as needed. And we'll get into how do you know when you should turn that irrigation system on at our next class. So next week, make sure that you turn in, but you don't want to tune in, I should say. You don't want to just keep your irrigation set the same throughout the year. You're gonna need less water in the winter months, but you're gonna need more water when we're hot and droughty for sure. All right, so again, with your irrigation scheduling, you need to go with your water management district that your county is under. So in Lake and Seminole counties, we are under the St. John's Water Management District, but there's other water management districts throughout the state. The one thing that they all can agree on is that you do not water between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And why would that be? Answer some of those questions that chat box. Yilin, did we get anybody that asked, told me where they like to canoe and kayak?
Yes, we did.
Oh, good. What what were some of the highlights?
Yeah, we got Shingle Creek. So I believe it's in Orange County.
Okay.
Another option is also from Mr. Andrew, Indian River.
Oh, yeah.
Another good information is the Leon Spring State Park. They just installed a new kayak slip last Thursday.
Oh, I'm actually writing these down, guys. I'm using this for selfish reasons. Oh, that's great. We've got 2 new kayaks. They were our quarantine presents to ourselves. So anyhow, but no, I just want you, but one of the reasons I asked that, yes, selfish reasons, but also because I just want you to think about the pristine water bodies that you want to help protect, and probably if you're on that call, you have that inclination, or if you're on this talk, you have that inclination already. All right, so anyway, why would you not want to irrigate between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m.? And that's because we get a lot of evaporation of that water, and it doesn't necessarily perk into that root zone with all that evaporation. Now, you don't want to do the flip side, and you don't want to water at night because we can get too much fungus buildup on the leaves of our plants. All right, so we're going to talk about turf very briefly. We'll discuss it again some next week, but these are some things that you can keep in mind. All right, we get a lot of cultural turf stressors. And by cultural turf stressor, what I mean is that is a man-made stressor, okay? So some of the things that we can do, and I just went to a site this past week where they were watering excessive amounts, and they had a gray leaf spot fungus all over their lawn, and their lawn was spindly, and it was in the shade, and their lawn just looked pitiful, but it was way too much water. So we can sometimes do too much water, but at the same time, sometimes we don't do quite enough, and we can stress that turf out too. Another thing that human beings can do is we can mow too short. And if we scalp our turf by removing more than 1/3 of the leaf blade at a time, we can really stress that turf out. One of the worst things you can do is let your turf grass get really thick and tall, and then come through and scalp it so that you don't have to mow as frequently. That can really stress your turf. So And then if we're dry or droughty, it can really do it in. All right, so just more consequences of too little or too much water. The root system can be compromised if you water too frequently. You're basically spoon feeding your turf. So you want to water once, twice a week, depending on conditions, and you want to water thoroughly and deeply. So again, you want to put out about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and we're going to tell you how to do that again next week. Then you can get more pest problems too by improper watering. Pests like it really moist, and your turf is going to succumb to pest when it is weak. So, but there's some other issues too. Weeds increase, and that could be dollar weed specifically. So you can get dollar weed in your turf from too much water. Dollarweed is an aquatic plant, by the way, and I actually was in the St. Johns River near Blue Springs State Park, and I watched manatees eat it. I had no idea it was a manatee food source. So if dollarweed can grow in the St. Johns River and you have dollarweed in your yard, you're probably watering too much. Hate to bust your bubble. All right, so let's talk about just some new sod plantings very quickly. You're going to, of course, water new sod first 7 to 10 days, 2 to 3 times a day. And you are actually going to do short duration because you're watering it multiple times a day. And the root system is so short when your turf is new. So it needs frequent light irrigations. Then when you get to about the 3 to 4 weeks after planting, you're going to do 1 to 2 times weekly. That turf should be close to being established. And again, you want to apply about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of water. So, but you can see how in between that we build up. So we are, start off with lots of frequent light irrigations and we build up to those 1, 2 times thorough applications of water. All right, so some visual indicators of turf. And next week's going to be fun because we're going to look at lots of pictures of turf, problems, irrigation issues, you name it. So anyhow, turf grass, if it needs water, it can have a bluish gray cast to the leaves. Sometimes you can walk across the turf and you can get footprints left in the turf. And then another thing that turf does when it's stressed from water is the leaf blades are folded in half. So it just looks like it's parched and needs water. With your landscapes, you'll start to see some of those high water using plants starting to wilt, like azaleas to me is an indicator plant in my landscape. If it's starting to wilt, I know that other things are probably starting to, reach that threshold where they need some irrigation. And then also Thryallis is another plant that happens to wilt on me as well. So there are some of those indicator plants that start to wilt. But with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Miss Tina now. And again, we're going to talk about a lot of these turf issues next week.
Thank you so much, Brooke, and thank you all there in Facebook Water Wednesdays, Facebook Live joining us today. And yes, share your places that you love to canoe and kayak. I've been on Shingle Creek before. It is lovely, a little hidden gem in Orange County. And we have lots of really great places in Seminole as well. So without further ado, we're gonna kind of switch gears to a more narrower focus. So Brooke kind of took us on a big picture journey of, water and why our irrigation systems are so important when it comes to, being water conscious, water wise, and also to benefit our plants that we love and give us enjoyment. So one of those aspects that is more of a preventative measure when you're talking about irrigation is mulch. So mulch is fantastic, and that's why it's its own Florida-friendly principle. It conserves the soil moisture. So a lot of us have sandy soils, and that water is going to quickly leach into the soil or go as stormwater runoff. But mulch helps to hold that water in the top few inches of the root zone so that they can access that soil moisture later, after it starts to dry up. So it's going to keep your soil moist. It's going to add nutrients to the soil as the mulch starts to break down over time. It's going to really add organic material in there as well, which we all need because we have such sandy soils. It's going to protect against erosion, reduce the weed growth. If you're using a nice, 2 to 3 inches, that's going to prevent those weed seeds from germinating, provide habitat for beneficial organisms, and improve the landscape appearance, of course. That's what most of us think about when we're thinking about mulch. And really, when it comes to mulch, there's some good and bad mulches, but all in all, we just recommend biodegradable organic style mulch, not a rubber mulch or even rocks. They're not going to provide the service that mulch will for your plants. So just make sure you're selecting a plant-based mulch, and pine is really great. Pine needles, any kind of leaves, that kind of stuff are going to help hold that irrigation. When you have an irrigation event or a rain event, it's going to help hold that water on site. So now we're going to start diving into the components of the system. And, I worked previously at the University of Central Florida Arboretum, and there I had the privilege of intimately getting to know irrigation, and it quickly among the staff became the alternative word of irritation. And so hence ensued our catchy title for today, because there's so many parts and pieces that can get confusing and tricky. But like Brooke said earlier, it is the law and it's our duty as water stewards to make sure that our irrigation is functioning properly. So we're going to talk about the water supply, the water conveyance, and then the distribution devices. So typically your water supply are going to be coming from one of 4 of these locations. So me, I actually have 2. I have a well on site that drives my irrigation for my yard. So that's just a well that's going right down into the superficial aquifer, and it's pulling water up. And then you can also have a municipal water source. So if I have a spigot on the side of my house, that's coming from my potable municipal water supply. So it could be your county or your city or something like that, but it's typically potable. The other 2 we have are a reclaimed style, and so that would just be only directly to your landscape irrigation. And that's going to be water that they're repurposing after it's been treated at the wastewater plant. So people flush their toilets, it goes to the wastewater treatment facility. They gently treat it to remove all the solids and stuff like that, but it still carries nutrients and other types of things in it. So it's going to have some salts, it's going to have varying levels of pH and things like that. So reclaimed, you can talk to your local provider of your municipality to see more about the reclaimed water if that's what you have. And then in Florida, you're also allowed to withdraw from a water body. So if you live on a lake, you might be drawing your irrigation water from that lake water. So it's not potable, of course, but it's going to be a little bit more maybe reliable or consistent than, say, maybe the reclaimed water. So those would be where initially the water is entering your property, entering into the irrigation system. And I'm going to hash out kind of each of these main components as we go through, but here's a brief overview of the entire setup. So as the water comes in, typically you'll have a backflow, especially if you have reclaimed, it's actually required by law. And that's because they don't want the reclaimed water, which again can have nutrients and other, levels of bacteria, things like that, flowing back into the potable water supply. So in a reclaimed system, you have to, by law, have a backflow. The backflow just prevents if there was a backup or some kind of, clog or something, that the water is not actually going back into the water supply itself. Then you're going to have an isolation valve, which can allow you to just shut off the entire system. If there was a break or something like that, it's just a little closure that allows you to close it up. Then you have your filtration device. The filter basically is going to remove any sediments or particles, particulates, things like that in the system. That's really important, again, if you have reclaimed, because sometimes with the first and secondary treatment, they don't get it all. And just checking your filters, making sure that those are well maintained. If you've never checked your filter, you might want to make sure you have one. They're not required. If you're using potable, it's really not required. But again, you never know what's going to get in there and lay eggs or whatnot. We had actually some midges in our irrigation system at the extension office because the flies decided to lay their eggs in the system. So again, the filter is helpful for filtering that kind of stuff out, and it's easily changeable, so it doesn't clog your heads of your irrigation system. The pressure regulation device, so Next week's really good. Brooks already shared some of those oopsie daisy photos with me and how to fix them. So definitely join us. But, people say to me, how do I, what's the best way that I can, tell me the magic number as to how long I should run my irrigation. And there's really no, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, because we all have different pressures that are coming into our yard. So again, from that water supply, you could have a very heavy pressure coming up from your well, or you can have a very low pressure coming in from your municipality, especially if everyone's running their irrigation at the same time in your neighborhood. So this pressure regulation device is going to help kind of stabilize that pressure for your system. The irrigation control valve that basically connects to some of the electrical stuff that we'll talk about later. And then again, you have your emitters and your distribution piping, which most of us are familiar with. You want to know where those pipes are before you dig, because you can break one and then you're going to have to get the glue out and replace it and things like that. So for system design, so you want to design, we talked a little bit about pressure on the last slide. You always want to make sure that the operating pressure is not exceeding the source pressure. So again, the source pressure is going to be from your municipal water supply, your well, things like that. And then the operating pressure is the pressure coming out of those actual spigots, those rotor heads. So you want to make sure that the pressure does not exceed the source pressure. You want to use devices that are designed for optimal uniform coverage. So you don't want, lots of heads kind of crunched together. They're evenly spaced. They're broadcasting, well over the landscape. And then, of course, we don't want to irrigate, like Brooke said, we don't want to irrigate those non-target areas. So if we have, roads or driveways, paved, even little brick paved, paved areas, we want to avoid all that, because it's really going to create a maintenance problem with having to pressure wash it to get all the algae off. And then, of course, we're wasting water and not watering our plants. So make sure you're targeting those areas that, where the vegetation is. So kind of drilling down a little bit more into those parts of the system. So we have our irrigation controllers, and this really varies to what brand you're talking about. So here on the left, this controller is going to be something that you would hook up to a spigot coming out of, the side of your house, or a hose, thing like that. It's usually battery operated and has either 1 to 2 valves coming out of it. It's going to have a timer system on it, a little bit more basic, but again, you could hook it up to, just a basic hose irrigation, typically not in ground. The one in the middle is more of a commercial grade. So just very few buttons, and you might have a multiple of them, just depending on how large of a acreage you're irrigating. This might be more for agricultural commercial use. And then what you see there on the right is going to be typically what we have for the home user, for the underground, in-ground irrigation system. So you want to manage the duration and frequency of your water cycles based on the controller. Now, again, you probably have to drag out that manual, which I know we don't always prefer to do, but the manual is going to help you better understand, the brand that you selected. Is there an app for it? Can you, what's the flexibility of being able to easily turn the system on or off, or, things like that. And then you're going to set a schedule for that. So you can do that on any of these type of controllers, from the basic all the way to the commercial. You'd be able to set a schedule for that irrigation to run. And again, sticking in our water restrictions right now for the rainy season, we're allowed in the St. John's district to water up to 2 times a week, depending on your the even or odd number of your home. So it's either going to be like Sundays and Tuesdays, or Saturdays and I think it's Wednesdays. So just check with that, that you're making sure to set the irrigation for that. Now, Brooke mentioned rain sensors, but we also have the ability to integrate a soil moisture sensor. And the University of Florida has been doing research on this and has found them more effective than the rain sensor. So these are not required by law, but they are more effective because they're actually saying, okay, how wet is our soil? Is our soil in need of irrigation right now, or is it adequately wet? Because sometimes, we can have a heavy rain, our soil is still wet, but that irrigation timer is still set to go off. And we're, again, harboring fungus, wasting water. So these soil moisture sensors, if you have, the interest and the funds to be able to integrate them, there's something new. Electrical valves, so these basically just help the system turn on and turn off at that scheduled time. Pretty basic, they're 24-volt entering in. Irrigation spray heads, so once the in-ground system has actually left where the controller is, you'd have your distribution piping all the way to something like these types of heads. So the pop-up sprayer, typically it's going to go back down into the soil, and when the system turns on, it's going to pop up and distribute the irrigation. These are usually used for, could be turf, could be landscape beds, things like that. Your rotors, pictured here in the middle, are going to be more for typically turf or irrigating large swath of the landscape. And then the micro irrigation, this is Florida friendly. I'll talk a little bit more about it. We could probably do a whole Water Wednesday just on micro irrigation, but this really helps to save water, save money on your water bill, because it's irrigating directly at the root zone. So with a good mulch, you can keep that water in the area. And with the micro, you're going to be directly irrigating around that plant and around that tree. So micro irrigation definitely has some benefits to it, but it's not typically recommended for turf. Now, if you say, well, I don't have a fancy, irrigation system, what can I do? So, if you're just looking to put a spigot out back to be able to supplement, like she said, during these droughty conditions, you want to make sure that you have something similar to this setup, or say maybe you want to install some micro on a little veggie garden. This would be something you'd want to consider. So you have your faucet and your water source, you have your backflow prevention device, you have that filter that's going to be filtering any, particulates out. It's kind of like the other system, but it's just very condensed, and it's all kind of linked to here. Then you have your pressure regulation device. Like we talked about, the source pressure and the system pressure can be different. So this pressure regulation device helps stabilize it. And then you're going to adapt any kind of, if you need an adapter for the type of tubing that you're going to come in, and then ultimately you'll run out to your drip lines or your micro, or maybe a sprinkler for the kids to run in, whatever, you're choosing to put on the end cap there. And then just backing up the benefits of micro irrigation. So again, when we're overwatering, we can incur pest problems. We could be watering the weeds, lots of issues. So if you want flexibility in, meeting the variable water needs, micro might be an option for you. It's great for establishing plants, and it's easy to change over time. So micro, if we were doing an in-person micro workshop, I would be able to have, you guys do some hands-on where you'd actually cut pieces of the micro irrigation, you punch little holes in it, and then you would actually just very easily adapt the emitters. So you can put in drip, emitters very easily. So, landscapes change and evolve over time, and having irrigation that's adaptable with that landscape, that would be micro, and it really is very beneficial. So it has about a 90% efficiency, whereas in-ground systems might have more of a 50 to 70% efficiency, because again, we're just doing a lot of broadcasting. I know the other day I was watching my neighbor's irrigation go off, and I could literally see it evaporating. It was very, very hot out, and it was just evaporating up and out of the landscape. And, again, that contributes to that water loss and reduction in efficiency. And it's going to comply with all local ordinances and our water conservation codes. So you can actually run micro whenever you want to. You could have this on a daily setting, although that's not really recommended because, again, with the fungus and the weeds and things like that. But micro irrigation is exempt from any of those, so it really is encouraged by our local governments to install it. And then, kind of going back to what Brooke opened up with our laws. So, there's really no getting away from maintaining our irrigation system. The more that you know, the better you'll feel about it. So hopefully you'll, you learned something today, and you're going to be interested in finding out what brand you have and learning a little bit more about your system personally. If you guys have questions, we're always here to help as well. And if you're not in Lake County with Brooke or in Seminole County with me, you definitely have a local extension office in your county. There's one in every single Florida counties. So you can reach out to them and they'll help you with your irrigation question. So we do have to maintain the system. We're going to have breaks. We're going to have little bunnies or, roots growing, things like that are going to get into our system. We need to kind of, get in there and make sure that we're maintaining it. So you want to periodically inspect your plants and making sure that they're not having signs of overwatering or underwatering. And then you would adjust your emitters or your timer appropriately. So to do this, you want to look for wilting. So that's going to be when the leaves are starting to droop down, changes in leaf color, if they're starting to really yellow, curling of the leaves. So in our turf, we're going to see that really blue curling start to happen, standing very upward. And that means that you probably need to turn on the irrigation, you're underwatering. And then also patterns in the soil. So, if the mulch is looking really dry in one place and wet in the other, turn the system on for a few minutes and just watch it and see what's going on here. We're all home a lot more now, but typically our irrigation is running while we're at work. And so just thinking about ways that you can, watch that system. And then cleaning and inspecting those filters, checking the emitter heads. Micro is great, but I will tell you one of the problems is the little teeny tiny micro emitters do get clogged. They're really easy with a little paper clip. You can just clean them out very quickly, but they do get clogged, and other types of the rotor heads and things will get clogged as well. So you want to flush the system to discharge any debris and reset the irrigation controller seasonally. So on my system, it actually has an automatic seasonal opt-in or opt-out. And so that's going to help me to better irrigate my plants. Now you want to make sure that it's not seasonal, like just generic United States seasonal, because we're very different here in Florida, obviously. So, check the manual for what it's stating specifically about seasonality. But, there is that option to help you save water. So with that, we're going to see with Yi Lin if there are any questions from the chat that we can answer. And you have pictured here my email address along with Brooke's email address. And again, I'm in Seminole County and she's in Lake County. And we're happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Thank you both for such an informative presentation. I'm looking at our Facebook page. We do have a few more answers for a good place to kayak or canoe. When it's, I'm pretty sure I'm not saying it right, it's a Econlockhatchee River.
Yes.
I know it's in St. John's River. Who wants to correct me how to say that?
Do you know, Tina? Econlockhatchee? Yeah. Okay, you go.
I am extremely familiar with the Econlockhatchee. It is a tributary that ultimately leads to the St. John's River. So it starts over in eastern Orlando, going kind of by Valencia and over through in Orange County up into Seminole County. So it is actually a Seminole County water body. We get it a little bit before it goes off to the St. John's, and it is lovely. It's there's lots of little parks that you can enjoy it. Blanchard Park, I believe, is one of them. And then we have a Seminole County Wilderness area that butts up to the St. John's or the Econ-Lockhatchee River. And it's quite lovely. So if you haven't been out there, yeah, it's a great time to.
Nice. Good. Thanks for the suggestion.
Yes, awesome. And another suggestion, it's a mosquito lagoon. So
Oh,
I'm not sure where it is. So
yeah, I've been fishing out there before. It's a fun place.
Well, I know somebody mentioned the Indian River Lagoon, and really any of those lagoons over in Broward County are going to be great right now for bioluminescence. So if you are ready for a nighttime trip, you can go out and canoe and see the bioluminescence as well. It's quite lovely.
So is that temperature regulated then?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. So with the heat, it's actually a different type of algae, and it's reactive. So when when you put your paddle in, you can actually see the glow. Or if you see schools of fish, then they'll be kind of glowing. It's lovely. You think you're in a Disney movie or something.
Very nice. I've got to check that out.
I think we need to organize a field trip like that. That will be fun.
We can social distance.
Yeah, and I have a question here actually. Are you two ready for that? It's about backyard chicken. So how about like how do backyard chickens affect nitrogen loading? So it's not a lot, 3 to 5 chickens. So do you have answer to that?
I think that's a fantastic question. I myself have raised chickens, and they do make a lot of organic matter, to say it nicely, and that is extremely high in nitrogen and other nutrients and things. So what I recommend is definitely keeping the stall or wherever the coop thing that you're using clean. And so when you're cleaning those out, you want to transfer them into a compost pile. So you want to be making sure that you're concentrating them into a composting area. And so if it's chicken wire, or if you have a bin or maybe a pallet system or whatever compost type system that you're using, it's kind of enclosing it. And as you're adding pine shavings or hay or the other stuff from the stall and your kitchen scraps and stuff like that, you kind of lock it in and really encourage it to turn into soil, rather than say if you're raising chickens by a stormwater pond and you're not as cautious and you're dumping them maybe just out in the open, it might start to wash into the water body. So yeah, we definitely recommend securing them up away from the water body, away from your house, in a compost pile, and you're going to get some really awesome soil. Give it time. This heat will break down those nutrients, break down the pine shavings, and it's a great addition to your landscape. And great question.
Yeah, composting is a great solution too for that. And then just to go on what Tina said, we do have like a 10-foot buffer that we recommend around water bodies if you're using a broadcast spreader that does not have a shield on it. So I would think the same could apply. There's probably not research to support this, but I don't know. But the same, something similar could apply as far as keeping animal waste that far away, at least too.
Absolutely. I know when we talk about our Seminole County fertilizer ordinance, we still don't really recommend using manure-based products, which would be a chicken manure, around the shoreline of a stormwater pond or lake or something like that. I think there's a grace period for establishing plants. But after that grace period is over, really you don't want to be mingling the manures and things.
Awesome. Thank you both. It goes to 3 o'clock, and that's basically all the questions we have. So we are going to wrap up today's Water Wednesday. Before we We let you guys go. We still want to let you know next week we'll continue the irrigation system, especially like calibration, like Brooke and Tina said, how much water you really need to put on the grass, how to do that. So next week it will be the meat of irrigation system. So please tune in next Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. And I also want to promote about ring sensor because during Brooke and Tina's presentation, they all brought up ring sensors. So for one Water Wednesday, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we did a Water Wednesday just about ring sensors, especially like how to make sure if it works or not. So if you missed that, please go to the YouTube channel and you can get a quick recap how to make sure your ring sensor is working. And also in 2 weeks, it's July 15th, we will have a Facebook live talk about different types of ring sensors. So how different type of ring sensors work. So you can see we have all the interesting topics all lined up for July. So please tune in every Wednesday afternoon. We will see you next Wednesday. So thank you again. And thank you for our guest speakers, Miss Tina and Miss Brooke. So enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. See you.
Thank you.